Good afternoon. In this video I want to deal with Robert Breaker and his defense of the Confederate flag and the lies that he tells about it. It's very disturbing because he's supposed to be a Christian and tell the truth, and the lies he puts up are constantly mischaracterizations of what the Civil War was really about. And this is disturbing. There's a Neo-Confederate wing in the dispensational group of King James Bible believers who come from Ruckman and Hoffman, Breaker, Denlinger, these guys who lie about exactly what the Civil War was about, the Confederate flag meant, and these type of things. They have to lie, they have to distort history. And when you're a Christian, you should be telling the truth. And these guys just outright lie. And there's a Neo-Confederate movement that distorts history, twists it, and tries to make like slavery wasn't an issue or wasn't really important, and the North was as racist as the South, and tries to get away with this. It was about the Tariff issue, blah blah blah. We'll see all about that and how this guy, who's supposed to be a minister and should be checking this stuff, but he's just putting out propaganda. The morale tariff thing he's talking about was signed by Buchanan. It was a Democratic president, pro-South. Pro-Southern. He signed it, and it was only put in after the South had left and tried to secede. That's why it was voted in. It was actually blocked in the 1860s. You can cry about the South wasn't represented and stuff like that. They had plenty of representation. In fact, they were overrepresented. They had a 3/5 rule, which was they counted the slaves as part of their population. When people want to lie, they're going to leave out context. And if you lie about this, you'll lie about anything. And that's exactly what the issue is here. So let's go ahead and listen to this guy as he blabbers on about this Confederate flag issue.
Hate. And this young man, he killed these people because he hated them. And that flag is a symbol of hate. But is that really what that flag means?
Interesting. He's talking about going back to a shooting spree, going back in South Carolina, back in 215, I guess this is. Here we are doing another shooting spree here again. So this is going to continue on from now on as part of the insanity of this country.
What does that flag really mean? Well, to some people it means one thing, and to some people it means something else. But let's look at something today. Let's take the history of that, and let's look at the historical facts about that flag. Let's look at history. And then let's go over here to the modern teaching about that flag, and let's see if they're the same.
I'm going to break this video up in parts, first 15, because I want to make sure enough of people can actually listen to it and show how people lie. This is how this guy gets away with lies, and this is how lies operate: dropping context, twisting things, ignoring. So hopefully you won't actually check on what he's saying.
Because a lot of people today say that flag only represents hate and slavery. Slavery and hate. I've never seen so much hate in all my life. But it seems to me that the hate isn't coming from this flag, it's from...
It represents slavery. The southern states attempted a secession because they wanted to defend the expansion of slavery. That's what they wanted to do. And these guys try to justify slavery with the Bible and stuff. The Bible never justifies slavery against one race. And that's the issue. That's what they were trying to say. They wrote slavery into their Constitution. The American Constitution never used the word slavery. It was always intended slavery would end and be gotten rid of. They saw it as something evil. The later southern states began to see it as a definite good. That's how the twisting began. When, as opposed to the founding fathers who saw this as an evil, we got to figure a way to end it, as opposed to later on when they saw slavery as a positive good and start rationalizing it and defending it.
Or the people that talk bad about this flag and say, we hate that flag, we gotta take it down. Well, let's look at what that flag really means, and then let's ask ourselves, should we take that down? What are the facts about that flag? You see, there's two flags that have flown in the United States of America, not to mention the British flag before that. But one of them is this flag.
Well, the British flag didn't fly over in the United States of America.
One of them is this flag. What do they do? Why do they want to only fly this one and say this one has to be banned?
And it holds up one American flag, one Confederate flag. Because the American flag won That's why if the Confederate flag, if the guys at the Confederacy won, they wouldn't be flying the American flag. So the American flag won. That's why we don't fly the Confederate flag.
Why is that? What does this flag really mean, and where does it come from?
By the way, he got a lot of hostile comments. He actually took comments on this thing, and he put a whole statement after it, and there's more lies in that statement. There's more lies in that statement, and you can go through that too, as well as that. But it just shows you this guy doesn't do his homework, doesn't do his research, and just is pushing an agenda.
Well, this flag is actually a battle flag. Well, what was the battle fought over? Why is there a battle flag? You see, this is the flag of the Southern Confederacy, and it was a battle flag. Now, a lot of people may or may not know the history of the Civil War. Matter of fact, many people today don't study the Civil War, and they say the Civil War was all about slavery.
Well, everyone knows it wasn't all about slavery, but that was really what the crucial issue was. Everybody, North and South, recognized the other issues. But slavery was the issue, because when the Republican Party won, and Lincoln won, he came into office to stop the expansion of slavery. He never said he was going to touch slavery where it existed because he knew it was constitutional. But he was going to stop the expansion of slavery. And the South reacted to that, the Southern slave owners, because they said, we are not going to accept that because now you're saying this is slavery is evil. Lincoln was attempting to return to the principles of the American Declaration of Independence. That we're all men are created equal. That is where he was trying to go. Return to the Republican Party was formed to go back to those principles which the South had rejected, the Democratic Party had rejected. That's what the Lincoln-Douglas debate's about. Lincoln-Douglas was rejecting the principles of the Declaration of Independence.
Is that true? Is that true? I've got a book here by a black man.
See, now it's a black man, so that's supposed to mean that there's some special relevancy because a black man wrote something about this issue. This black man is going to blame America, which is why Colin Kaepernick is basically saying America was responsible for slavery. We all know America was involved in slavery before the various states started getting rid of slavery. That was the issue. When the American Revolution happened, there was a compromise with slavery, the slave states, in order to keep them in the war. But it was always the intent to get rid of slavery.
Named Stanley Lott. Here he is on the back.
He shows us a book like, okay, wow.
He wrote this book, Slavery in the U.S. Government, the case for the protection and support of slavery fostered by the U.S. government.
Which they did, because it was constitutional. No one questions that. No one questions that. They actually supported the Fugitive Slave Act, where southern states were allowed to go into the northern states and pull out escaped slaves from there. All these guys always want to defend based on the Bible. You weren't allowed to give up escaped slaves. That was forbidden. But they ignore that. And they always talk about states' rights, and they ignore the fact that the northern states who had outlawed slavery, the South didn't care about their rights. They want to go in and get their slaves back.
Now, this black man, who's a really smart guy, has studied this issue of slavery, and you know what he found out? He found out that it's not this flag that set up the institution of slavery.
Yeah, because it didn't exist then. He's holding the Confederate flag up.
Slavery. It's this right here, the Constitution of the United States.
And he laughs, ha ha ha. Yeah, we know it was part of the Constitution. That was a compromise made in order to win the War of Independence.
States of America that instituted slavery in the United States.
Slavery is never mentioned in the Constitution, though. It's never mentioned in the Constitution because it was always intended it was always intended by the founding fathers that they would get rid of it.
America. Well, if you believe the narrative today, this flag
slavery is mentioned. Negro slavery is mentioned in the Confederate Constitution.
Is evil because it's for slavery. Why aren't you against this? You see,
that's why we had amendments to get rid of it.
The Constitution of the United States of America was made by men who wrote into the founding document slavery itself. So you hate this flag because it invokes how awful slavery was.
The intent was to get rid of it, and that's what the South was resisting. The attempt was to get rid of slavery, and gradually the northern states which had slavery legal, they eventually state by state forbade it, and the South started hardened because of the financial benefits to slavery. They started to harden and rejected any attempt to get rid of it.
Then why don't you hate this document right here? Well, at least that's the argument of this man, a black man, who wrote this book. It's a good book.
What the black man is probably saying there, he's probably saying you should hate the Constitution. That's what Kaepernick was trying to say with the whole kneeling thing. That you should hate America because of its history of involvement with slavery.
There's some really smart black folks out there. And this guy wrote this book and he showed.
Gee, what a shock, huh? Some really smart, you get condescending. There's really some smart black people out there. Wow. This guy.
Well, he showed the history. If you look at the history of the United States of America, you know what you find out? Not one southern ship ever went over to Africa and brought slaves back to the South. Never happened. The British ships and the northern ships.
Now, I don't know if that's exactly true, but the fact is, and what he's going to leave out here, is that the North was the ship. It was where the ships came from. The North, it was a seagoing area. The North, Massachusetts, that area, they're the ones. The South was importing. The North were the exporters. That's why that would happen. And so they were the importers of the slavery because they were the ship guys. They were the ones involved in shipping.
Are the ships that went to Africa and got slaves and brought them back and sold them to guess who? To the South. And when the country was founded by the founding fathers, they wrote into this document, it is legal to own slaves. So why do you automatically demonize the South and say, oh, they're all about slavery? Why don't you study history and realize slavery started with whom? Slavery started with the United States government.
Who's to know that? I mean, that's a fact. The problem is the South, the reason the Confederacy rejected because we were trying to get rid of slavery. That's what they fought over.
The United States government is the one that was pro-slavery and set up the institution of slavery. So you see, you look at this flag and say, oh, I hate that flag. It's all about slavery. We're going to see in a minute that it's not. But what's all about slavery is this document right here.
He holds up the Constitution. That's all about slavery. You liar. You anti-American liar.
Constitution of the United States of America that set up the system of slavery.
It was the South who refused. That's why we had to keep it in there because the Southerners were always attempting to use that as an excuse for secession, arguing about that. The South was always arguing for secession. Actually, you go back to the War of 1812, it was the Federalists up in the Northeast who actually did the first movement to secession before the war ended, and they were considered traitors by the South. So we talk about secession here. When the War of 1812 was going badly, and the shipbuilders were suffering because of the blockade by the British, the Federalist Party attempted secession up there. They were about on the verge of doing it. The war ended, and the Federalist Party never recovered from that. And the South greatly criticized them as traitors for trying to secede, saying you didn't have rights to secede. Andrew Jackson, when these Southern guys came up, says, I'll hang anybody who attempts secession.
Interesting how you want to demonize that, but you won't look at the Constitution. I love the Constitution.
No, you don't. You liar.
I love it, except for the slavery that was in it. But I don't demonize.
Yeah, except for the slavery that was in it. Yeah, that was the problem. That was the problem. That's why we got rid of it. And that was the South was trying to keep it. Slavery in their Constitution. That's what they wrote it in their Constitution.
It's the South. You see, I come from a part of the country where this flag is flown everywhere. And it's because people understand what it means.
No, people don't understand what it means. It's kind of taking on a whole different context of what it means, what it represents. Because of people like this who lie about exactly what it was standing for. We have a flag that flies. Yeah, it's an American flag. We don't need to fly a Confederate flag.
Historically, not emotionally. Let's call this teaching over here the emotional.
Yeah, our side is emotional. His side is historical and factual. Yeah, right.
Doctrinal teaching of today of how that flag is awful. Let's see what's happening is there's a brainwashing technique.
Brainwashing now. Where have heard that from? Brian Denlinger. Brainwashing.
Going into effect to brainwash people into thinking that this is an evil symbol and that it means slavery. Don't allow yourself to be brainwashed. How about educate? Don't.
Yeah, how about the truth? How about the truth? Let's see where this guy goes with the truth, a liar.
Hate. How about let's learn something? I'm a student of history. I love history.
You clearly aren't a student of history because you don't know history.
Let's look at the historical facts of this flag right here and this flag right here. So during the early 1800s, the United States of America was beginning to grow as a nation. And the North began to get more people and more power. And the South had less people. And you know something that's quite interesting? Only about 5 to 6% of the people in the South owned slaves.
Why is that interesting? Why is that even, who cares? The fact that they were the ones who controlled the politics in the South, those 5 and 6% of the slave owners, they controlled the politics.
That means only about 6% of the entire population of the South were slave owners. Isn't that interesting?
No. Who cares? The fact is they controlled the South. They controlled the Southern political system.
Today, when you listen to the news media, they tell you anybody that has that flag hates black people and they're evil. When the actual history of that flag is only about 5 to 6% of the people in the South had slaves. You know what that means? That means
the rest of the people who were defending that flag were duped. Duped and fighting for something they shouldn't have been fighting for. By the 5 or 6% people whose only interest was to protect their own slaves so they could keep growing their slavery. That's the problem with that. The people who ended up fighting for that were actually just fighting for something they shouldn't have been fighting for.
95%, if we take 5%, of the South were not slave owners. So why?
But they would defend the institution. That's the problem. They were defending the institution of slavery. You couldn't argue against slavery in the South during the Confederacy. They'd hang you. If you're an abolitionist, you go down there, they would hang you. So these guys talking about the conservative view of freedom and freedom of speech, and they didn't have freedom of speech in the South. They hung anybody who talked out against slavery. And they stopped teaching slaves how to read and write, and they stopped teaching so slaves could not read the Bible, because they knew when slaves read the Bible, then they would have a consciousness of their own self-worth and independent, soul freedom of independence, and therefore they feared teaching their slaves about the Bible, teaching about the Bible, because they didn't want them as human beings. They wanted them to treat them as cattle, because they knew the problem was of recognizing someone as a human being and keeping them in slavery. Then you got a whole different issue there, because you know that they have guilt on themselves and what they're doing.
Why would we allow them to take this flag and brand 95% of the good Southern people as evil for something that...
We don't say all the people evil who defended that flag. We say the flag. The flag is the problem. We understand a lot of people defend that. They were defending it for various reasons. Robert E. Lee defended Virginia because he had loyalty to the state. Doesn't mean they were defending more slavery. You don't understand the different reasons for fighting for the South.
5 to 6% of the Southern people really did. That's interesting.
No, it's not interesting. It's a red herring. It means nothing. The problem is the white people who went to fight for the South were duped in fighting for a flag that they had no really interest in defending slavery, but they were fighting. They believed they were fighting for their states and their homeland, their home.
You see, a lot of people, they can't see any further than black and white. So all they think is, well, that's white people's flag, and they're evil because they had black slaves. Really? What's history teach? About 95% of them never owned a slave a day in their life. So why are you demonizing an entire populace of people?
Not demonizing an entire population of people, demonizing the flag. Now he's getting off the topic, the flag. It's not the people are demonizing, it's the flag and what it represents.
Over something 5 to 6% of the people actually did. That's interesting. So, as history continues, before the Civil War, the North had so much power that the North passed a law called the Moral Tariff. Now,
this is good. This is how messed up this guy is on this issue.
It's not moral like immoral, but the Moral Tariff was a tax on the Southern people. I like to call it the immoral tariff. And that tax was a tax between 40 to 48% of the income of Southern people. Imagine that, if you will. Now, I'm not a good artist. I'm not going to draw a perfectly accurate rendition of the United States of America, but let's go ahead and write it up here. More or less, there's Texas and everything.
The tax wasn't on import. It wasn't a tax on the Southern people. The problem is when you raise an import tax, that's what it was. You raise that up, then the Southerners were exporters, and so they would have to deal with retaliation tariffs by, for instance, like the British, would raise up their tariffs, and therefore it would cost the Southerners in that issue because they will end up getting hurt in their exports. It wasn't a direct tax on anybody, individual in the South. It was an issue of importers versus exporters.
Here's the United States of America, all right? Here's the dividing line, Old Dixie. Here's the North, here's the South. The North got in power and had all the population and all the power, and the North said, we're going to tax the South up to 48% of their income.
The South had control of the presidency. The South had control of the Supreme Court with Taney. That's where you had the Dred Scott decision, which says a black could never be a citizen of the United States, and that the War for Independence was not fought based on the Declaration of Independence. It was just dealing with white people. The Dred Scott decision, look that one up. And the fact that the South was overrepresented in the House of Representatives, for the simple fact is that they had the 3/5 rule. So black slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person, so therefore that increased the representation in the House of Representatives. So they were overrepresented. Now, the more here's the Wikipedia on the tariffs in the United States, and we just read from here. The moral tariff significantly raising tariff rates became possible only after the Southern senators walked out of Congress when their states left the Union, leaving the Republican majority. They were represented. They were blocked in 1860 when Republicans got elected. They were the fact is that they could not. They could have, just we see today with things are being blocked in the Senate. They could have blocked anything. They left the Senate. This is an issue of taxation without representation. They could have blocked that tariff, but would never gotten through. Let me see here. And I'll link you to this. It was signed by Democratic President James Buchanan in early March 1861. So it was a Democratic president signed who was pro-Southern, James Buchanan. Shortly before President Abraham Lincoln took office. That's what secession was about. The election of Abraham Lincoln. That's what this secession was about, and his platform to stop the expansion of slavery. You don't have these liars tell you anything differently. Pennsylvania iron mills and New England woolen mills mobilized businessmen and workers to call for a high tariff because they wanted, basically that's what it is. Remember, there's no income tax. Tariff's the only way you get taxation. I mean, there was no taxes on individuals before when this was happening. Tariffs was the only way you could raise money in this issue. Now, obviously, if you had taxes on whiskey and things like that, you could do that. But there was no income tax. It was signed, but Republican merchants wanted low tariffs. Well, there's one, okay. Republican merchants wanted low tariffs. The high tariff advocates lost in 1857, but stepped up their campaign, blaming the economic recession of 1857 on lower tariffs. Economist Henry Charles Carey of Philadelphia was the most outspoken advocate, along with Horace Greeley and the influential newspaper, the New York Tribune. Decreases were finally enacted in February 1861, after Southerners resigned their seats in Congress on the eve of the Civil War. That's how it got passed. The Southerners left Congress. And this guy's can try to claim this is like the American Revolution. They had no representation. They left the Congress. This liar. Some historians in recent decades have minimized the tariff issue as a cause of the war, noting that few people in 1860-61 said it was of essential importance to them. Most people don't care. They didn't care. That was not the issue. Compromises were proposed in 1860-61 to save the Union, but they did not involve the tariff. Yeah, no one even brought up the tariff, but the issue of saving it. This was pushed after the Civil War when the South did not want to be branded as being pro-slavery. So they had to rewrite everything and pretend it was something else. So they hatched onto the tariffs. Arguably, the effects of the tariff enacted in March 1861 could have made little impact upon any delegation which met prior to its signing. It is indicative of the Northern industrial-supported anti-agrarian position of that 1861 Republican-controlled Congress. Some secessionist documents do mention a tariff issue, though not nearly as often as the preservation of the impactful economic institution of slavery. So when you read the Southern documents, most of them mention slavery as being the issue, not the tariff. However, a few libertarian economists place more importance on the tariff issue. That is where these guys come up with this thing who are Neo-Confederates and started making a big crusade. Oh, it wasn't they're really anti-American and pro-Confederate. And they make this lie up. But this guy is pushing this lie that this tariff issue was the major issue. And, so this is, the fact of the matter is the facts speak otherwise. That tariff would never have been passed if the Southerners had stayed in the Senate and they could have blocked it and filibustered it.
That was the reason, my friend, for the Civil War. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president, all of the South said, Mr. Lincoln, are you going to uphold the moral tariff? And Lincoln said, yes, I will.
Yeah, it got passed. It's part of the law. See, now he says, oh, when Lincoln got passed, he said the tariff hadn't been passed. I mean, the fact of the matter was it was signed by Buchanan, who was a Democrat president, and it could only have been passed when these guys left. When these guys left. I don't know what he's talking about. Are you going to uphold the tariff? That was, where does it say where they asked that? They were concerned about his stopping the expansion of slavery.
Uphold the moral tariff. A tax on the South by the North of upwards of 40-some%, up to 40% of their income. You know what the South did? The South said, that's it. We're gone. We secede from the Union. We want...
Nowhere in the Constitution says you can secede from the Union. No government's ever going to form that says you can have a right to secession.
To have what? Equal representation.
Yeah, equal representation. The reason the bill passed is because the South had already left. When Lincoln was elected, some southern states seceded, and the Senate left. The senators left, just like it says in that article.
Before, in the 1700s, there was a revolution in the United States of America. Before it even was formed, there were colonists that fought against Britain. And as they fought against Britain, they chanted, no taxation without representation, no taxation.
Because there was no representation. We didn't leave the Parliament. We weren't represented in the Parliament. We were being treated like a colony, not as an equal partner with the British. They were passing taxes on which they didn't have to actually deal with themselves. That's why we resisted on that. We said we knew where this was going, and we rejected that. The South had representation. They just left the Congress. That's why that tariff issue got passed. They were upset about Lincoln getting elected, and they knew the handwriting on the wall was that slavery was going to be outlawed from going to the new territories. That was the issue.
Without representation, and that's why they fought against Britain, because Britain was taxing them to death. And then, not even 70 to 100 years later, the North does the exact same thing that Britain did and tried to tax the South to death. Now,
the fact is that the South had representation, and they chose to leave the Congress, and they had a Southern president, Buchanan, in there, who was pro-Southern, who signed that into law.
Was the South right? Of course. There was a thing called states' rights.
No such thing as states' rights. No such thing as states' rights. The fact is, states exist, all governments exist to protect the individual. That's their responsibility, to protect individual rights. No such thing as a state right.
Every state had the right to secede according to...
Secession is not in the Constitution. Such thing as secession. And Robert E. Lee believed that, by the way. Robert E. Lee did not believe that secession was legitimate written into the Constitution.
This document, the Constitution of the United States of America. Matter of fact, all the soldiers...
Why don't you read it? Why don't you show us where it says secession is allowed, where the word secession shows up and shows us that you're allowed, a state is allowed to leave, and, because they're mad about something and they just want to walk out anytime they want.
That went to West Point, they were given a book, and in that book it said, the Constitution says that all states have a right to leave the Union.
I want to see this book. I've never heard of such a book, because it doesn't exist. Robert E. Lee did not believe that secession was legitimate, and he wasn't planning to secede, except for Virginia, secede. But the fact of the matter is, he rejected the idea of secession.
If they so desire. So the South said, we do not...
The guy just throws out stuff. Show us this book where it says that. Show us this book where it says, yes, the states will allow us to secede. No, these Confederate these officers who left had pledged loyalty to the Constitution, and they broke their vow. They broke their vow in doing so by leaving the America, by fighting against America. They broke the vow that they made, their pledge to defend the Constitution. They went against the Constitution.
I want to be a part of anything that takes 48%, almost half of our income, and gives it to those people up north. So the state...
It was the Southern slave owners who were upset about that, not the average Southerner.
According to their rights, had a right to secede from the Union.
There's no right to secede from the Union, and that's not why they seceded from the Union, you liar. They seceded over the issue of slavery.
That, my friend, was the reason for the uncivil war.
No, see, he's trying to make the tariffs the issue. The tariff was never the issue for the Civil War. No one's fighting over tariffs. And you had representation in the South, and you left. That's why they left. They left when Lincoln was elected. Some southern states left over that. That is what the issue was. Because he was going to stop the expansion of slavery, not the tariff, which was signed in by a pro-Southern president.
It was over a moral tariff. It had nothing to do with slavery.
You liar.
Well, if it did have anything to do with slavery, it was these Southern people not wanting to be enslaved to the Northern people.
You're a liar breaker.
You see, the South was about slavery. It was about the North trying to enslave the South to the...
See how history's rewritten? You see how you can rewrite things when you just don't have, you just want to put out propaganda and lies?
And tell them you have to give us your money. So the Civil War...
This was under, tariffs are passed on representing government. And the South was overrepresented in the House of Representatives. They had full representation in the Senate. They had controlled the Supreme Court with Taney, and they had a Democrat president who's pro-Southern in the White House. So tell me where the South wasn't receiving representation. A liar.
Started. Now, do you know what happened? A lot of people to this day say the Civil War started with the shots in South...
Okay, I'm going to stop here because then he goes on and start lying about the issue of something. I'll deal with that later. Just shows you what the guy's a liar. And this whole wing, this whole entire wing that has now spreading through the King James Bible dispensational movement, this Ruckman, Hoffman wing that now this guy Breaker's involved in, the lies he's pushing, and now that's what Bryan's involved. And that's why they against interracial marriage. This is all related to this issue about the Southern, the Civil War, what we represented. The South became evolutionists. He's got a thing. Breaker's got a thing about the spiritual war, like these, the Northerners, didn't have any Baptists up there. They were all Unitarians, stuff like that. The issue was the South began looking at evolution and looked at the black as inferior. And that's why they defended their views on slavery from an evolutionary point of view, not from a biblical point of view, not from a biblical point of view. Then they always put that curse of Ham nonsense in there. But the fact is that you couldn't. They used evolution, and that's where they attacked the Declaration of Independence of saying all men are created equal. That's what the issue was. The battle was about. So we'll look at again. I'm going to link you to the article on the moral tax tariff issue. Look at what he's saying about the Confederate flag, and see what in the Southern Constitution they put in. You won't see slavery in the American Constitution because they intended it to last forever. But in the Southern Confederation, it says in all such territory, the institution of Negro slavery. See, they put Negro in. They don't want whites being enslaved. They wanted Negro slavery, specifically one race. Where did that come out of? Evolution. I didn't come out of the Bible. I came out of evolutionists. Because just like the Nazis, they believed in a superior race. The whites were a superior race. That is what that was based on. That was what their ideas were based on. This was a pre-Nazi fascist view of races. That there was a superior race against an inferior race, the blacks. And so that gave them a right to keep the blacks enslaved. Now he's going to talk about how happy the blacks were under slavery. This is the myth that, And all such the institution of Negro slavery as now exists in the Confederate States shall be recognized and protected by Congress and by the territorial governments. That's the issue, territories. They wanted to expand slavery, the territories. And the inhabitants of several Confederate states and territories shall have a right to take into such territory. That was the issue. Was slaves be allowed to be taken into the new territories? That was the issue the Republican Party ran on, to stop that expansion into these territories. That was the issue, not the Tariff Act, the Moral Tariff Act nonsense. These guys make this stuff up. You know, I know exactly where it's coming from, what group it's coming from. And they're liars. Shall take the right to take to such territory any slaves lawfully held by them in any slave or territories of the Confederate States. Let's see here. Okay, so basically, what they will Negro slavery into their own constitution, and their big thing was that if there's new territory formed up, a slave owner could take his slave in there, and that slave, would be protected, because they consider that a slave state. That's what the war is about. How was slavery going to expand, or was slavery going to die? That was the issue of the war. And all this junk that these guys throw out, these liars throw out, exactly that, lies. And they deliberately distort history. I'm going to deal with this guy. This guy, you guys all think he's gregarious and smiling and jolly. This guy has things in there. He's lying through his teeth. He doesn't mind lying to you. He'll lie right to your face. He doesn't care. So let me go on, and we'll stop there, and then we'll deal with the issue, more issues that he deals with. And again, people come in, oh, how can you say this about Robert Baker? He's a liar. He's a liar, and he's claiming to know history, and he's in the condescending, patronizing, oh, if you only knew history, you know this, you know that. You know history very well. And what these guys write, these Neo-Confederates are trying to do is rewrite history. And the Christians are involved in that. Ruckman's involved in it, Hoffman's involved in it, Baker's involved in it, Dellinger's involved in it. All these guys are involved in this rewriting of history. And they'll lie right to your face. They don't care, because they want to justify their own views on race. That's what this is all about. That's what the old view is about. Their defenses against interracial marriage and why they're against it. And they got to go back to the Confederacy and all this, and they go, the curse of Ham and all this stuff, and lie. And then, the Confederates were noble, and they were trying to defend states' rights, and they would define, it represents freedom, blah, blah, blah. It represented nothing. It represented a superiority of one race over another race. The white race, according to these people, had a right to enslave another race. The Bible deals with slavery as very realistic, and deals with it and say, okay, people are going to get slaves. But it never says one race should be enslaved. It represents people, anybody can be a slave. That's white, black, anybody can be enslaved. That was the issue. It had nothing to do with any racial superiority. The fact is that based on what happened in your country and military defeats and like that, slavery was a reality. But certainly the Roman Empire, but getting rid of it and recognizing that individuals shouldn't be enslaved. That was the issue. It came in the 1860s, and the United States finally, was trying to get, the Republican Party said enough is enough, and was trying to stop the expansion of slavery. And Lincoln even offered to compromise in his New Orleans Address. Look, I'm not coming to take away your slavery because I recognize it's recognized in the Constitution. But that wasn't enough for the Southerners. They said, no, we're going to accept it. We're not, you're a monster because you're going after our institutions. You're making us feel bad, making us feel guilty that we have slaves, and therefore. And he tried, and he said, look, we understand your problem with this. We have, in the border states and like that, slavery, people owned slaves that it's like, they didn't know what to do with them. A lot of people wanted to get rid of them, but they had responsibility to them, who old black people and things like that, who couldn't read and things like that. So you had a real problem. No question about slavery was this. So no one's demonizing people back then. This was a real problem of how to address it and how to get rid of it. And take care of the people at the same time so they can make that transition from slavery to freedom. So it was a major problem. But let's not lie about what's really happening here. Let's not lie about the real reason for the Civil War. The fact of the matter is that the South decided they were not going to give up their slaves. They were not going to accept any transition from slavery to freedom. They were not going to do any of that. And that's why they thought they could just leave. And they couldn't leave the Union. They couldn't leave the Union. Because they were breaking federal law. And we'll deal with the issue of Fort Sumner and taking federal forts and things like that. It's illegal. It's illegal. That's what these guys want to ignore. The fact is that they signed the contract with with the issue of the Constitution. They have a right to break the law. And that's the reality. They were breaking law. Any president in office And see, Buchanan didn't do that. Buchanan didn't enforce the laws. He allowed the South to get away with this stuff because he was pro-Southern. He said, secession is wrong, but I can't do anything about it. And Lincoln said, no, you got to enforce the laws. Same thing Andrew Jackson would have done. You got to enforce the laws. So we'll deal with that later and deal with the second part of this guy's lies and how he distorts the truth. And if you guys distort this, what's he going to do with the scriptures? That's the point. That's the point. He's distorting history here, saying he's the historian. He knows this stuff. He doesn't give any proof. They're reading history. They're reading this stuff in West Point, how you could secede from the Union. I want to see that book. Because Robert E. Lee didn't believe secession was legitimate. So he'll put that out there like it's a fact. Then he'll give you the lies about the moral tariff act. See, it's about tariffs. And it was trying to suppress the South. The South could have blocked the tariffs anyway. And I tell you, go to the thing on the bottom of this thing and see the comments he makes there and recognize that's why he doesn't comments anymore in his videos. He can't handle them. He can't handle them. So we'll move on after this and deal another part of more of Robert Baker's lies about the Confederacy. Amen. Thank you.